Hi there, welcome to episode 27 of Posture Labs and Alignment Fundamentals. My name is Emma. Thank you so much for being on my channel and tuning in to learn something new. In this series, we're covering alignment fundamentals and some modifications for basic yoga poses. So each week we cover a new pose. This week we're covering lizard pose, Utthan Pristhana. Now, I don't know if I've ever actually said the Sanskrit name of this pose because I always just say lizard pose. Feels like one of those poses like most people just know it by the English name. And maybe that's because I live in the US, but yeah, there was another pose like that I thought, standing splits. I had never really referred to it by its Sanskrit name, so I'm learning something new as well. For this pose, you can use blocks, but you don't have to. This pose is pretty intense on your hips, so let's jump right into things. Lizard pose, I generally like to get into from a downward facing dog. Now when I do this, I like to bring my thumbs to touch in downward facing dog, just so it's a little bit easier for me to step my foot wider. I'm gonna start by stepping my right foot outside of my right pinky finger. Now, once I get there, I want to make sure my right toes are pointing forward. So my toes aren't turned out. That's a setup for a different pose, which we will be covering next week. Now my back leg is straight, strong, and powered up. So I think about pushing the back of the left knee up towards the ceiling and pushing my heel back. I'm trying to keep my hips level. It's pretty easy to fall onto that left hip here and let the right hip lift. I'm trying to keep my hips nice and level, like I had a glass of water or something sitting on my lower back. Now, hands down is fine. However, for the pose, we do want to eventually come down to the forearms, which is where the blocks come in. So you can always use your blocks, maybe on this medium height, and start to wiggle onto your forearms. This is a great place to start because you don't have to go down all the way yet, as it's pretty intense. So you might spend a few minutes here. You could always set your back knee down to rest and keep hugging your right knee in towards your shoulder. So don't let that right knee flop outwards. There's a lot of engagement through the inner thigh. You're pulling your belly button up and in and kind of scooping your tailbone towards the back of your left leg. So the tailbone's tucking, low belly squeeze, gaze is down, neutral spine. Almost think sternum forward a little bit, broaden your collarbones. Eventually, you might turn these blocks to the shorter height, or maybe even remove the blocks entirely. So both forearms go on the mat. Your forearms are parallel, so avoid clasping your hands like you might for a bound headstand. Now here, really think about evening out the hips. Try to sink that right hip a little bit and pump up your left leg. Really nice and high on those left toes, pushing the heel back. Hug your right knee in, squeeze your belly. Feel some space between the shoulder blades. Keep breathing. And release. Now let's go ahead and do that on the other side, and I will show you by facing you so you can see the setup a little bit better. So we will start, let's actually just start with the hands on the blocks. The left foot outside of the blocks and the right foot stepping back. So I want to make sure my hands are inside my left foot. I could even wiggle my left foot out a little bit, but make sure the toes are pointing forward. The left knee is stacked over the ankle, so I'm creating a 90-degree bend in this front leg. Now I might start to bring my forearms down towards the blocks. Hug the left knee in towards the left shoulder. Even out the hips here, so it's easy to sink to the right. Makes the pose a lot more comfortable. Think about pumping up the right leg. Push the back of the knee up and sink the left hip down. Pull the belly button up and in, tuck the pelvis slightly. Eventually I might come down, blocks or no blocks. So forearms down and parallel. So I'm not clasping the hands together. Palms are down, kind of like I would in a forearm plank. Hug the left knee in, pumping up that right leg. Push the ball of the left foot down. Less grip with the toes. Squeeze the inner thighs towards your midline. Breathe here for 3, 2, and 1. Lower that down. So this is a pretty intense stretch on your hips. So I would usually put this towards the end of class. This is not something I would do in the beginning. You want to do some poses to warm up to this. So like a low lunge for sure. It's a lot on your back hip flexor. It's a lot on your inner left thigh. So maybe some skandasana, maybe some side lunges. I generally, again, put this towards the end of class just because it's pretty big on your hips. So keep that in mind. If you're practicing this right now, you might want to take it easy and definitely start with those blocks. Now, I've had some teachers say like you could just stay up on your hands. That's a fine modification. Just know that eventually you do want to work towards your forearms. I would rather use the blocks and go to my forearms than just stay up on my hands. The blocks are super helpful in a lot of poses. I know when we first begin our yoga practice, at least for me and a lot of people I've talked to, we don't want to use the blocks because it feels like you're cheating or not doing the pose fully. That couldn't be further from the truth. So the blocks are there to amplify your practice, to help you. Better to do the pose correctly with blocks than just stay where you are stagnant without the blocks, at least in my humble opinion. You can always drop the back knee for a few seconds and lift it back up. That would be my recommendation to modify the pose. Make sure you are warmed up before you do this, and that's about it. If you have any other helpful tips, tricks, ways to get into lizard pose, let me know. There's always plenty of options when getting into a pose. I always just share what I'm most familiar with or what I think works best for my students. I hope you found this helpful and have fun practicing lizard pose. Let me know your thoughts in the comments, and I will see you back next week for a very similar pose.